Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will divide my remarks into two parts, a few comments analyzing the current U.S.-China situation, and then making some proposals, 5 or 6, for actions that the committee, the Congress, and the administration should take. This is all summarized in the first 3 pages of my statement. On the analysis, the U.S. and Chinese global trade imbalances are rising sharply. The IMF predicts that the Chinese surplus is headed toward 8% of its economy. That would be $800 billion over the next few years. There's a typo in my statement on page 5, says $800 million. That's less than 1 day of their surpluses. They're headed toward $800 billion over the next few years. Second, China's currency remains substantially undervalued, importantly due to that country's massive intervention in the foreign exchange markets, and is a major cause of its large and growing trade surplus. We now estimate that the Chinese currency is undervalued by 15 to 25% if you want to get their surplus down to 3% of their economy, which is probably sustainable over time. But if you want to totally eliminate their global surplus, their currency would have to go up by 25 to 40%. Now, the Chinese, in recognition of all this, did announce 3 months ago a willingness to let their currency start rising again and respond more to market forces. However, over that period, as the chairman indicated, the currency has risen by less than 1%, in essence, no effective adjustment yet. China did let its exchange rate rise by 20 to 25% from 2005 to 2008. In my view, our goal should be to persuade and encourage it to permit a similar increase, 20 to 25% over the next 2 to 3 years. That, I believe, should be our U.S. goal. That increase in China's exchange rate would, on our very recent analysis, reduce China's global current account surplus by $350 to $500 billion, and it would reduce the U.S. global current account deficit by $50 to $120 billion. In short, though lots of other trade issues have been mentioned here today and are important, the currency question is by far the most important in quantitative terms for our own economy. These analyses and numbers suggest that elimination of the Chinese currency misalignment would create about 500,000 U.S. jobs in this condition of high unemployment in the U.S. Others have estimated higher numbers. Our own judgment is about 500,000 jobs, mainly in manufacturing, mainly above average wages over the next couple of years. And of course, this particular stimulus action would have a budget cost of virtually zero and therefore would be quite cost effective. Now, the trick, of course, as in the past, is how to achieve it. And I would suggest 4 or 5 steps. First, with the chairman, we should seek to mobilize a multilateral coalition to press China to let its currency rise by the needed amount. The European Union, a number of important emerging market countries, including India, Brazil, Russia, have also expressed deep concern over China's currency policy. I do not believe our administration has really made a serious effort to mobilize a coalition. We've shown we can do it on other issues where we really want one. We should try it here. Second, this currency realignment question is an integral part of the global rebalancing strategy agreed by the G20. And it will be discussed and hopefully adopted in some detail at the upcoming G20 summit in Korea in November. So we should put major weight on forming as wide an agreement among other countries as possible, use that G20 process, which is very promising, to push for Chinese concurrence, agreement, and cooperation. To date, however, we have to admit that the results from the IMF efforts, the international community more broadly, to persuade China have largely failed. And the truth is, the IMF has no enforcement tools of its own. That's a shortcoming in the global monetary system. Hence, I believe the United States and its allies should turn to the World Trade Organization and seek its authorization to impose restrictions on imports from China unless it allows its currency to adjust adequately. Now, to lead this multilateral effort credibly, both in the G20 and the WTO, the administration must, of course, designate China as a currency manipulator, as it has been for at least 7 years. The law calls for that. I believe the administration should do it. We can hardly ask the world, through the IMF, the WTO, the G20, to indict China if we are unwilling to do so ourselves. Also, on the trade policy front, I believe the United States should also henceforth treat currencies that are substantially and deliberately undervalued as constituting export subsidies for calculating and applying countervailing duties. In economic terms, a deliberately undervalued currency clearly represents a subsidy and an equivalent import barrier in economic terms. I believe the Commerce Department made an error in its recent determination that they are not countervailable, but as a result of that administrative decision, I recommend that Congress pass that part of H.R. 2378 that would clarify that currencies that are substantially and deliberately undervalued should be treated as export subsidies subject to U.S. countervailing duties. I believe that such action would pass the test in the WTO articles, but I respect the right of China, if they disagree, to take us to the WTO to protest and see if the conclusion is correct. I do believe, Mr. Chairman, there are a few technical problems with H.R. 2378. I've enumerated them in my statement. I do not think the same logic applies to anti-dumping duties as to countervailing duties, so I hope the legislation could undergo some modification before it's voted. But I think the basic thrust of treating deliberately undervalued currencies as export subsidies subject to countervailing duties is correct. Finally, I would like to put a new idea on the table. I believe the administration should initiate a new strategy of what I call countervailing currency intervention against the Chinese purchases of dollars by making offsetting purchases of the Chinese currency. The way China keeps its currency undervalued is very simple. Every day it buys about $1 billion worth of dollars in the currency market. Keeps the dollar price up, the renminbi price down. We should counter it. We should sell dollars, buy renminbi. Now, there are technical problems because the renminbi is not freely convertible. We'd have to find some proxy currencies. We might not be able to do it dollar for dollar, but the message would be unmistakable if the United States adopted such a policy, which I believe it should. Countervailing currency intervention would be far superior to countervailing duties because they would cover all of our imports from China. They would also improve our exports to China by driving up the exchange rate of the renminbi. And so I think that's a new dimension that we should explore seriously and begin to apply on a global basis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.